You're listening to The Briefing, first broadcast on the 6th of February, 2026 on Monocle Radio. Hello and welcome to The Briefing, broadcasting live from Studio One here at Midori House in London. I'm Chris Chermak. Coming up on today's program, we'll start in Washington, D.C. with the view from Bloomberg's bureau chief there on talks with Iran, some of Trump's domestic priorities, and...
Over the past year, my administration has taken extraordinary steps to make sure the United States has all of the critical minerals and rare earths that we need.
A critical minerals stockpile and summit that took place in the U.S. Capitol. We'll also get China's perspective on that summit. We'll hear part two of our interview with an independence movement in southern Yemen. And finally, Monocle's Julia Jen is here. And Julia, we're talking unlikely Olympians.
Yes, Chris. So we're going to be looking at the unlikely countries sending athletes to the Olympics. That's including Singapore and Haiti.
All that right here on The Briefing with me, Chris Chermak. Happy Friday to all of our listeners out there. We'll start today's show in Washington, D.C. Never with a dull week over there these days. On Wednesday, Donald Trump made nice with Gustavo Petro of Colombia. And today, the administration is hoping to make nice with Iran, the two sides holding talks in Oman. In between those two major geopolitical meetings was a critical minerals summit, not to mention all sorts of goings-on around how elections should be run, whether ICE agents could be softer in their approach to rounding up immigrants. Well, here to talk through some of those many issues is Peggy Collins, Bloomberg's Washington bureau chief. She joins us now from the U.S. Capitol. Peggy, great to have you on the show. I have to start by asking, when I run through just some of those things, do you ever get whiplash over there with each week that passes?
You know, Chris, we certainly are always on the jump in D.C. It is not dull, and we are constantly toggling between all the news that is coming out on the foreign policy side as well as the domestic policy side. So I think it's less whiplash and more of a constant trying to digest the news and break it down on all fronts around the world.
And as you say, pivot between the foreign policy and the domestic side. And we want to try and do some of that with this segment as well. So let's start with those Iran talks that I mentioned that are happening today in Oman. What is the view from Washington? What is Washington expecting from these talks? Are they hoping, are they talking up a breakthrough, or is military action, frankly, still very much on the table?
So far, Chris, our reporting out of the region related to the talks, as you said, in Oman, that the U.S. and Iran have had talks, and the effort is mainly to de-escalate the tensions in the Mideast. Tehran and reports from there are saying that it is a first step in a longer process. From the U.S. side, we have Special Envoy Steve Witkoff there and the president's son-in-law, Jared Kushner. So far, we haven't had too much coming directly out of the U.S. in terms of a readout of the talks, but the overall goal is to de-escalate those tensions. As we know, over the last couple of weeks, they have really mounted with an armada heading there from the U.S. in terms of military presence, and President Donald Trump really speaking out in terms of wanting more from Iran on both the nuclear front as well as in terms of a domestic policy front for them in Iran.
They absolutely have ramped up those tensions. And even if we haven't gotten an announcement yet from Washington, as you say, what is the mood there? What is the mood in the States when it comes to something like Iran? We've had all these focuses on foreign policy, as you say, Iran, Colombia this week, Venezuela. How is all of that playing back home with Trump's MAGA base? Are Republicans pushing for him to focus a little more on domestic concerns?
I think there's two things mainly going on, especially as we've come into this new year. One is that we're seeing that the Trump administration is really putting a large focus on Latin America, as we saw with Venezuela coming right out of the new year, and the Middle East. Why the Middle East? Since Trump took office last year, we really have seen the Trump administration focus on the Middle East as an area ahead for profit and for business. And one of the ways that they need to be able to do that and see that through from a foreign policy way is for the Middle East to be a more stabilized region. So that's some of the backstory in terms of the focus for the Trump administration on the Middle East from a foreign policy sense. And then, of course, Latin America as well is really core to the foreign policy as it relates to some of the natural resources, whether it be oil or a competition with China from there that is really coming into play.
Well, and we'll talk about critical minerals and that aspect of natural resources in a moment. But before we get there, just run us through, from your perspective, a little bit of what happened on the domestic side in Washington, D.C. this week, because Trump has also, amid all of this, focused to some degree on domestic issues. The economy, the government was shut down, is now not shut down anymore. Also on housing. What's he been doing with all of that?
That's a great point, and it does dovetail into the foreign policy in this way. It is a midterm election year here in the United States. And so just as the president and his administration are trying to set the country up on a foreign policy point of view, they know very well that their base and the elections coming up are really important. And the key issue for voters in 2024 was around the economy and immigration. So the president knows that that is something that voters are holding them to account for. And while the economy in the U.S. is in a solid place right now, we are expecting jobs report data next week, more inflation data next week, and overall, Americans are still feeling the pinch in terms of cost of living. And one of the biggest factors there is housing. So we had a story out earlier this week about how home builders in the U.S. are talking to the administration about ways to unlock housing supply, potentially making it easier for people in the U.S. to rent, to buy a home, starting to rent, and then eventually becoming a homeowner. But housing costs in the U.S. are one of the biggest things that are weighing on voters in this overall picture of the cost of living.
Well, and even just to follow up on that, interesting. I mean, Trump has gone kind of back and forth on that, hasn't he? On the one hand, he's also said that he actually wants housing prices to be high because it helps people to sell their homes if they have value in it. So, I mean, he's also gone after institutional investors for buying up single-family homes. So what do you get the sense of what's actually going to happen on that?
I think no matter what, the president is going to continue to put pressure on the Federal Reserve to lower interest rates, because the mortgage rate is one of the things he really looks at in terms of high mortgage rate, meaning that people have a harder time not only buying a home right now because rates are higher, but for people to sell a home, they have to feel like they can buy another home and not be paying more. So it is that toggle between acknowledging that so many people in the U.S., and particularly baby boomers, have acquired a lot of equity in their homes and is one of, if not the biggest asset that they have, as well as trying to make sure that the younger generation and first-time families have a place to potentially build their own equity and homes in the U.S.
And just finally then, Peggy, this Critical Minerals Summit, there wasn't just a summit, there was also this creation of a strategic critical minerals reserve worth around $12 billion, and then a summit trying to rally other countries to the U.S. side on critical minerals. What's your sense of how much that will achieve?
That's right, Chris. And we broke that story on Project Vault, the $12 billion stockpile. There are a lot of details that we're still reporting out in terms of how it will work. But the overall importance here is this competition over critical minerals is core to the relationship between the U.S. and China, but also how the U.S. is leveraging its relationships with other countries around the world. Critical minerals are key to even some of the talks around Greenland. Looking forward, the U.S. is realizing that it is one of the key areas where we are going to need to be able to have our own stockpile, for lack of a better word, and make sure that we continue to have access to them so that we can compete on a business side going forward for years to come.
Peggy Collins, Bloomberg's Washington Bureau Chief, thank you very much for joining us and running through all of those different stories. And now here's Carlotta Rebello with the day's other news headlines.
Thanks, Chris. A senior Russian military officer was rushed to hospital after being shot in Moscow, according to local investigators. Lieutenant General Admiral Alexeyev, the deputy head of Russia's military intelligence, was shot several times at a residential building in northwest Moscow. The assailant is still unknown. China has joined the race to develop space-based data centers. The state-owned China Aerospace Science and Technology Corporation announced it will work on the centers as part of a larger 5-year plan to expand the nation's already significant space presence. It is also looking to expand resource development, monitor space debris, and develop space tourism. And the 2026 Milan Cortina Winter Olympics has officially begun. The Games will feature almost 3,000 athletes from over 90 countries who will partake in an opening ceremony at Milan's storied San Siro Stadium later today. Tune into Monocle Radio every weekday at 10 a.m. London time for our live coverage of the event on Monocle in Milan in association with Allianz. Those are today's headlines. Back to you, Chris.
Thanks very much, Carlotta. Now, as you heard at the top of the show a little earlier, President Trump has been busy on the critical minerals front trying to secure allies. And the question now is how China will react to all of that movement from Washington, D.C. For that, I'm joined now by Jonathan Imon, senior reporter for The Wall Street Journal in Singapore. Now, John, great to have you on the show. Let's start with, from China's perspective, a summary overview, if we could. What kind of critical minerals does China actually have that the West wants, and what are they used for?
Sure. Well, critical minerals is a broad range of resources, and every country's got a slightly different list. But basically, China dominates nearly all of them. So, one of the most frequently discussed ones is rare earths, which are this set of minerals that are very important for high-tech everything. So they're used in electronics, they're used in electric vehicles, they're used in weapon systems. And China dominates the mining of rare earths, the processing of rare earths, and the making of them into these magnets, which are sort of the widgets, which they, are frequently used in. But it's not just rare earths. This goes to nearly everything in the critical mineral space. So, like, another one is antimony, which is used to harden bullets and has other functions for electric vehicle batteries and all sorts of things. And China is by far the dominant miner and processor of that. More commonly used metals like nickel. Chinese companies dominate the processing of nickel, in this case abroad in Indonesia. But basically, when you just go down the list of these minerals that are very important for the economy, for the high technologies like semiconductors that every country is trying to grow in advance, China just dominates most of them.
It is incredible how much of this China dominates, Jonathan. And to turn it around, how much does China rely on critical minerals, rare earths themselves? Not so much in terms of the way that we all do for, components and things that they will be producing in China, but how much do they rely on the export of those critical minerals? How much does China's own economy rely on the money that it receives from other countries for them?
Yeah, it's a good question. The answer is not a lot. So this is why they're such an effective weapon, right? Because often, such an effective trade weapon, because often if some commodity that you control and everybody else needs, you stop exporting it to punish a country, well, it will really hurt your own economy too, right? But critical minerals are a little bit different. Like if you look at rare earth magnet exports, China's global rare earth magnet exports, just in terms of the dollar value, it's not very high, but it's in the low billions of dollars. It's not that important. I mean, some companies are very impacted when China slows down or cuts off the exports of these things, but it's very small in the context of China's economy, and certainly the Chinese state can please companies and prop them up some other way. But the other side of that is it's really devastating for the companies and the countries that are no longer receiving these minerals. Because if you think about a rare earth magnet, they might cost just a couple of bucks a piece, but you can't make an electric vehicle without them. So if China cuts off the exports of these things for the rare earth magnet producer in China, I mean, that's super annoying. It's a pretty small scale company in the scheme of things. China's economy does not rely on the revenue generated by them. But for the Fords or the GMs or the automakers who need these to make their cars, they can't do without them. So it's extremely effective leverage for that reason, because China's economy can basically emerge unscathed, cutting these things off, or nearly unscathed, but the effect can be devastating. So it's a great trade weapon.
Well, and then with that in mind, Jonathan, you kind of answer my next question, or at least I feel like I know what your answer is going to be, but how concerned is China going to be then about something like a critical minerals summit in the United States and efforts by the U.S. to sort of rally other countries around a trading bloc for critical minerals that does not include China? Is that a problem for China?
Yeah, I mean, I think certainly that is. I don't think they're going to, not express their discontent too loudly. There's still a lot that can fall apart about these Western plans. But yeah, if these things advance in the West, as I actually expect them to, and as a lot of people expect them to, then yeah, this is going to remove an important part of China's leverage. And I mean, China will find other things and use other things. And there are so many critical minerals it can certainly find ways. But this is worrisome for China's ability to use these minerals to damage the economies of Western countries. Absolutely.
Well, and it's interesting that you put it that way, Jonathan, because then if I understand you correctly, it does not impact China's economy hugely, as you've been saying, if, say, Western countries stop buying critical minerals, but they are so aware of the leverage that they have with this that they will actually be concerned if Western countries start looking elsewhere.
I expect so. I mean, China's public statements are often along the lines of, we're providing a service to the world by providing you with these critical minerals, some of which are, cause environmental damage in our own country to mine and to process. Nonetheless, we provide them to you. And we have for decades. So now sometimes we're not going to be able to for any number of reasons. Don't get angry at us. Maybe this is something you've got to figure out yourselves. But in general, we've been providing this service. So if you no longer want us to provide that service, that's fine, because we were just this was almost an act of charity. It's kind of the way Chinese public statements tend to be about rare earths. So at least I think the public positioning will be great. You found, you don't need to rely on us. Good, grow up. Now that might not actually. Obviously, there are, I'm sure, people in the Communist Party who think quite differently and are and will be looking to develop other strategic levers, of which China has other options, of course.
Jonathan Emond of the Wall Street Journal in Singapore, thank you very much for joining us. You're listening to The Briefing on Monocle Radio. You are back with The Briefing. I'm Chris Chermak. To Yemen now, where yesterday on this very show we heard about the fate of an independence movement in southern Yemen based out of the southern city of Aden. This movement sought to expand its territory in December and was then forced back by Saudi Arabia's military. At the start of January, the umbrella group for the independence movement, known as the Southern Transitional Council, was pushed out of government in Aden, with a UN-backed government that hopes to one day unite the whole country, taking its place. Well, today we pick up the story with what happens next. Amr Al-Bid is a senior official with the Southern Transitional Council. He stopped by Midori House, and we began this segment by discussing whether his group will work with that new UN Saudi-backed government that's been installed in Aden.
We've been part of this government for a couple of years, and there was an agreement for that in order to provide services and security, which we are part of, till we find a solution with the Houthis. So that was the main objectives of this period of war. But now with what happened, even today's rally, they said they're not accepting anyone to come back from Riyadh to Aden, which is... The main idea is that we have to have a dialogue. They are responsible for providing services and security. Still, we will push for that because we're not part of the government, but they are responsible for this. So we will push for that. But then we would definitely ask for a dialogue to see how we're going to achieve all of this, how we're going to shape the next phase together. And that needs a real dialogue in a neutral venue.
And that next phase, would there be a practical element to this of almost supporting this government, helping them take back the country, the northern part of the country, from the Houthis? Is there an argument almost that if they move back up to Sana'a, perhaps that gives you a better opportunity to restart that dialogue in Aden? I mean, is that something you have an interest in, that fight, as it were?
Previous to this situation that we had the last two months, as an SCC, we've been calling for what's what's next? What is the strategy? And that was the call of the STC for the last 2 years. Are you going to fight the Houthis and gain back Sana'a? Or this is it? Just let us know, because we can't stay at this period for a long time, because it's not helping our people. So we need to have this discussion. We've been calling for this. It's obvious now from the messages that we get that the idea of taking back Sana'a by force is not there anymore. They should have a dialogue and have a deal with the Houthis, which they started when they wanted the Saudis designed a roadmap with the Houthis, which STC refused at that time. Now we still ask the same question. What do you want? Are you still capable of taking back Sana'a by force, or you want to have a dialogue? They can't stay in Aden for a long, long time like this. People will go out and say, no, you should stop. It's either you go back to Sana'a, or the Southerners should manage their areas and then enter a dialogue for their future. What do they want? What is the best solution for Yemen as a whole? Is it a federal state? Is it a two-state solution, or what's next? We have our, for sure, as an STC, we have our own thinking and solution to that, which is to establish a federal state in South, we call it South Arabia. But that has to come through a dialogue and referendum to our people. So our conditions to any dialogue, they called for a dialogue. Say, any dialogue, whatever outcome, the dialogue should be approved by our people. So our people should say if this outcome suits them or not, and that's through referendum. So that's our main message now as an STC, that we STC is still on the ground. We have popular support, and we are open for dialogue, and whatever outcome that we have in this dialogue has to go back to our people in the south to decide if this outcome is right for them or not.
And that brings us back to, I guess, the level of popular support that you have. If you could describe that at the moment, because as you say, on the one hand, many people are out on the streets. You're organizing weekly protests. There are protests happening today as well. At the same time, there are certainly going to be voices in Aden and in the south who want stability. They want a situation that does not lead to another conflict or anything like that in the south or the north, for that matter. What does that mean for the future of the STC, the Southern Yemen independence movement?
The rallies on the street doesn't contradict with the authorities on the ground to establish stability. This is just expressing what do they want. Then they go back home and live normal life. They're not vandalizing or going on the streets and trying to stop people from living their own. They go to plazas that's known, that's safe. They've been doing that. The things that different from last 5 years and this time, but honestly speaking, which makes me also admire this nation. Normally when it's our thing, as in the south, that we make protests, we support this logistically as an STC. We support heavily in the logistics, how to bring people to the streets, and we used to do this in a good way. This time we didn't pay a penny. They've done that by their own. The people just went out without any help from the STC. Only the president of the STC asked them, you need to come out now. And everyone just came out. And it was, for the last 30 years, I haven't seen any rallies in the south as the ones that we had for the last 3 weeks. It's massive and without any support from the STC. So that gives you an indication that even if you fall militarily, but you still win politically and you win the support of the people. And especially when you're honest about their wishes. And I think that's what we are trying to do, and hopefully that we can achieve doing that. But definitely we don't want this to affect the well-being of the people. And we're not coming across as destabilizing the authorities in the provinces and to not provide services and security. This is not our goal there. And we're making sure that we don't do that. And that's how we conduct our struggle.
Just finally then, that's the domestic side, but I do want to ask you about the international side, because you are here in the UK. How are you pleading your case, I suppose, to the international community that also might have an interest, but at the same time, frankly, probably wants to see stability in Yemen, rather than reopening some of this, perhaps, to put it frankly, want this to go away?
I understand Yemen been a headache for the region and international community for so much. Mainly, it was a headache for our people to suffer all of this. That's the main thing. We were telling everyone, like, stop making experiments on these people and make setups, like, and try to, based on interests of everyone. We have a long history, especially in the south and also in the north, that the elites always decide what's the setup. And we've been doing this for a long time. And we always fail to have a good model, fall into a cycle of violence. And I think this time, that's what we want. Give the people the choice to decide what they want. For the last 70 years or 80 years, they haven't decided. Let them decide. Even the unity of Yemen. Yemen was between the south and the north in 1990, decided by the people. It was decided by leadership. It was my dad who did this at that time. And that was, yes, the project was good, but we didn't let the people decide. Now, at least, we want the people to decide what do they want. And I think that's our messages now, that whatever outcome, whatever you think it's good for the people, let them decide if that's good for them or not, at least this time.
That was Amr Al-Bid of the Southern Transitional Council of Yemen. Thanks very much to him for joining us at Midori House. You're listening to The Briefing on Monocle Radio. And finally on today's show, to the Winter Olympics of Milan Cortina, which get underway with the opening ceremony today in Milan. Monocle will be there throughout the next 2 weeks, and as ever with the Olympics, the story isn't just about the winners, though I will be rooting for Austria's always dominant skiers, but also the underdogs, the unlikely Olympians, outsiders, as we termed them in an article for Monocle's Alpino newspaper. And joining us now to talk about those unlikely Olympians is Monocle's Julia Jen. Are you feeling the Winter Olympic spirit, Julia?
I guess, yeah. I will be tuning in this weekend, definitely.
We all will be tuning in. And let's start with your own home country of Ukraine, if we could, before we get to some of the ones you profiled in the Alpino newspaper. Who is Ukraine sending? Are there big winter hopes? Is Ukraine a big Winter Olympic country?
Well, seeing as Ukraine is currently in the depths of deep, deep winter, snow, ice, everything, I think we should have hopefully a good chance sending someone. So we have 46 athletes going in total, representing everything from luge, freestyle skiing, alpine skiing, all the way to skeleton and figure skating. And I don't know. I don't know if it's being covered as much sort of as it is kind of in other European countries, maybe other priorities. But I definitely think it's sort of one thing the Ukrainians are having fun with for sure. I mean, there is kind of nothing more fun than sort of the incredible tricks that you see people doing on the screen during the Winter Olympics.
Well, it is a mix, we have to say at this point, of fun and seriousness, obviously. What does it mean for Ukrainian athletes to be representing their country in something like the Olympics in this moment?
I think it's a statement that, life goes on, that Russia can't disrupt the natural rhythms of life, because that's their ultimate aim in this war, is to prevent Ukrainians from being able to function properly. Ukrainian athletes have had to leave the country, so they've gone to places like Austria, Germany, even all the way to the US and South Korea to be able to carry on training. This is true for, the kind of Summer Olympics that we have, and also, of course, the Winter Olympics and, football, everything else that you get in terms of competitive sport, because the issue is that as soon as an air raid alert goes off, and this was going off really every few hours, if not continuously throughout the day, any athlete who's doing any type of training has to stop immediately and go to shelter. We've also seen Russia target specifically sports kind of centres. So there's one particular skeleton athlete, competitor that Ukraine is sending to the Olympics this winter, and he is from Chernihiv, and the stadium where he was training was targeted in the very first few days of the full-scale invasion back in 2022, and it hasn't been rebuilt since, to our knowledge. So, this kind of spaces that you can actually practice in, they're far and few between. There are bases though that are safe. So we have, of course, in Ukraine the mountains, in the west, the Karpaty, and there, of course, you've got ski slopes. There's quite a burgeoning ski sort of scene in Ukraine as well as we have in neighbouring countries like Poland. So you do have those moments of calm, but it is kind of weighing up the ability to be able to train properly and not to have your schedule disrupted continuously by air raid alerts.
Well, as a skier myself, I hope to visit those western mountains one of these days in Ukraine. But Julia, let's look also at some of the other people you've interviewed for this story in the Alpino winter newspaper of Monocle. You wrote about a Singaporean skier.
Yes, and he was an absolute pleasure to interview. So this is Faiz Basha, and he is a university student, so very young, 23 years old, and he is going to be competing in the slalom. And he has great hope. So he is actually Singapore's first ever athlete that they are going to be sending, or they have sent to the Winter Olympics, which is very exciting. So he's breaking a record there already. But he's also ranked very well in sort of the Southeast Asian kind of scene in terms of skiing. So he has very high hopes. But when I was speaking to him, the kind of main message he wanted to bring across was that in Singapore, it's such a tiny country. There are very limited resources in terms of being able to actually set up a proper, indoor skiing centre for people to actually practice on. And I think he wants to kind of pivot attention back home away from maybe academics or those kind of very sort of intensive courses that you do, and towards actually Singapore growing this, having a homegrown kind of base of athletes. And he pointed to Joseph Schooling's kind of victory over Michael Phelps in the swimming category in the Olympics back in 2016 as the kind of moment where Singapore actually woke up to this talent that they have in terms of athletics.
Very interesting. And yes, how you can build a sport in a country with a bit of success in sports in the Olympics is certainly a big deal. You also, as part of this, we profiled a Haitian skier as well, though I understand he sort of grew up in France.
Yes, so this was Stevenson Savart, and he was interviewed by my colleague Lucrezia Motta. And yes, so he was actually born in Haiti, but then he was adopted at the age of 3. So his heart, very much remains back in his home country. And he was nervous about the idea of representing, could he actually represent Haiti in such an unlikely sort of category for his home country. But he was very much inspired by another Haitian skier, Richardson Viano, who became the first Haitian actually to compete in the Winter Games back in 2022. So he was inspired and spurred on by him, and I think they've sort of created a friendship between the two of them, really willing one another on in such an unlikely kind of category. And so, yeah, I think he was expressing in the interview that he feels very proud to be representing his home country like this.
Absolutely, as they all should be very proud. Again, as long as they don't take Austria's medals, I'm fine on this. But just finally, we're going to be talking later this evening, Julia, about favorite winter sports films on the Monocle Daily. One of mine is certainly Cool Runnings, the Jamaican bobsled team, just a total classic. We bring news of the Brazilian bobsled team.
So this is an absolute legend of the kind of Brazilian sports team. This is Edson Bindilati, and he was interviewed by our colleague Andrew Miller. And he was he was part of the very first bobsleigh campaign that Brazil put out back in 2002. So, he's been around. He kind of knows the sport inside out. He knows the scene, and he's been building that presence in Brazilian sport. He actually retired, and now he's come back from retirement to ensure that his team qualified for Milano Cortina this year. So he is very much a driving force in Brazil.
Absolutely. Well, we look forward to all of those. I'll give them the bobsled. That's okay. Austria doesn't do so well in that. Julia, Jen, thank you very much for joining us today. You can order a copy of Monocle's Alpino newspaper from our website. Listen to Monocle in Milan as well. It's a special Olympic show starting on Monday. That's all the time we have for this edition of The Briefing. It was produced by Monica Lillis, and our studio manager was Elliot Greenfield. The Briefing is back on Monday at the same time. I'm Chris Chermak. Have a great weekend, everyone. Goodbye, and thanks for listening.